Immigration has to be the most toxic issue on the agenda. I just hope that by addressing it, it doesn't provoke the response of a minority whose habit it is to make completely unjustified accusations of racism or xenophobia. Prejudiced assertions of this kind are particularly disturbing. When they have the effect of stifling debate, they're profoundly anti-democratic. I wouldn't for a moment blame anyone for getting on a plane if they can earn more than they can earn at home. Why shouldn't they want to improve their lives? And actually, I can understand why some people react like a scalded cat when the subject of immigration is brought up. A few years back, a series of reports claimed that EU immigrants were paying considerably more in tax than they were receiving in benefits. And a more recent UK HMRC assessment was reported to have claimed that immigrants from Europe were paying 5 times more than they get. So it is perhaps not surprising that some people simply had no idea of the negative impacts of immigration, thought they were all positive, and that therefore any negative reaction must therefore be xenophobia or racism. Ironically, a prejudiced assumption to make, but then much of the media simply never told the true story. It's only more recently that these studies have been seriously questioned in the wider media. The HMRC report was thoroughly debunked by an independent, non-political think tank, Migration Watch, when it was revealed that this study only compared the amount of income tax and national insurance paid versus the amount of child benefit and tax credits received. It didn't include any of the cost of public services, schools, healthcare, transport, or anything else that all our taxes go towards paying. Migration Watch calculate we can add a net direct cost of £1.1 billion, in fact, for EU immigration. And then we had the revelation that the figures published by the Office of National Statistics, showing net immigration from the EU at a hefty 172,000 for 2015, seem to be completely at odds with the numbers of people registering for national insurance from the EU. Numbers in the same year were over 697,000. It was then revealed that the Office of National Statistics figure for immigration didn't include immigrants who said in a passenger survey when they arrived that they were planning on staying for more than a month, but less than a year. I can't imagine that many people from Eastern Europe, so accessible with a cheap Ryanair or other low-cost flight, would plan to stay for more than a year before they nipped home for a holiday to spend some of their money. When these figures were added, immigration figures from the EU more than doubled. But I'm not sure the figures are really stacking up, even now. Certainly in the south of England, from my own experience, there are large numbers of people who work as cleaners and manual workers and who work for cash. So they never need to register for a national insurance number and in all probability do not pay tax. So do we know how many migrants from Eastern Europe there actually are? No. But for anyone who uses shops or restaurants in London and the south of England, or works in the construction or services industry, or in any of the lower paid industries, the scale of immigration from Eastern Europe is very clear. It's vast. But do we know what the impacts are? The impacts are not the same for everyone. Large businesses benefit from having a huge pool of low-cost labour, people who are happy to share rooms in houses and so can live and work very cheaply and send money home. But for others, particularly the younger generations, who are trying to get onto the housing ladder, the increased demand for housing, driving rents and house prices up beyond their reach, has had a devastating impact. House prices and rental prices are driven up by demand. Demand and therefore prices are massively increased due to the influx of people. I know many young people who simply can't afford to buy a house, start a family and move forward with their lives. Only 10 years ago, nearly 60% of first-time buyers were aged between 25 and 34. Now it's not far off from being half that number. That is a horrifying statistic. It's nothing short of a social breakdown in our society. This impact alone can be truly devastating for people who simply want to do what their parents did. Build a career, meet a partner, buy a house, start a family. Yet they can't do it apparently because the European Union requires that we have free movement of people. Our population can't move forward because the EU says everyone else can move anywhere they want in unlimited numbers. Migration Watch calculates that 60% of local authorities will not have enough primary school places by the year after next. They describe the current scale of migration, based on the official figures, not the unexplained figures, as being completely unsustainable. They project that our population is to rise by 500,000 every year, a city the size of Liverpool, every year. And it's not just the impact on schools, the impact on demands in the health service is huge, and wages are being depressed by the huge supply of workers. Wages haven't kept up with growth in house prices for years and years. Demand is pricing people out of the market. housing is filled with multiple occupancy immigrants, driving up rents and house prices. But it's not just our economy and people that suffer. The reality of the impact on Eastern European countries was explained to me in detail quite recently by a Polish lady, one of the first wave of immigrants, who's lived in the UK for around 10 years. She explained that the energetic, motivated people left Poland to go to the UK or elsewhere first. Then, on their first visits home, their friends hear about their adventures and see their money and leave too. Then the visits home get more and more infrequent, because more families and friends have emigrated, so there's less to go back for. And the result is that those left behind have far less chance of improving their circumstances. She was explaining a phenomenon that used to be called the brain drain in the 1970s, when high taxes in the UK drove so many of our skilled and motivated people abroad. We need investment at home, she said. We need our brightest, smartest people rebuilding our nation. But let's just go back to the impact on young working people who cannot get on with their lives because they cannot afford houses and their salaries or wages aren't rising anything like as fast as house prices. The government tell us we can't leave the European Union because the EU say that we can't have free trade without the free movement of people. And apparently our exports would be hit too badly, so the younger generations all have to put their lives on hold until sometime, maybe never, because effectively we can't afford to pay the tariff bill for exports that we would have to pay outside the EU. So I spoke to an economics analyst a few days ago and asked him if he could supply me with a breakdown of the tariffs we would have to pay if we were outside the EU and had to pay tariffs at full World Trade Organization rates. His detailed estimate was for the total amount of tariffs we would have paid based on all the exports for 2015. It comes to £4.6 billion for the year, about 3.5% of the value of our exports. That's roughly half of the net membership fee that we pay every year to the EU after you take off the UK's rebate and all the money that the EU spend in the UK. Does anyone have any idea why we would carry on like this? Immigration's not a bad thing. Immigrants in the overwhelming majority are people with the energy and drive to get up and get on. When we have skills shortages, we need immigrants. Uncontrolled immigration is the crazy thing. A government that simply throws up its hands, feeds us with ridiculous propaganda and tells us we can't do it is the problem here. We need proper, fully accountable democratic governments that can't hide behind EU rules. A government that supports its people because it knows if it doesn't, it will get fired and replaced. Let's support our rising generations and those in their 20s and 30s who are locked out of the housing market, struggling to make ends meet and with an otherwise bleak future. And by the way, if we were outside the EU, the tariff bill that EU exporters would have had to pay us for the goods they sold us amounts to roughly 8.9 billion. So in fact we would have been 4.3 billion better off. Which is why the fact that the EU exports considerably more to us than we do to them is such a crucial factor in the economics debate. Quite simply, we'd be better off out. The Treasury reports are simply political campaign material. Surely everyone grasps that. And of course, as everyone knows, the clamour from German car makers and French food and wine producers, who want to keep on selling to their biggest market, the UK, means it's very unlikely that we wouldn't have something at the very least approaching free trade when we leave the EU anyway. Thanks for watching.